She thought because she drove a white BMW X5 and ran the HOA, she owned my land. She was about to learn that in Texas, the deed is king. I know, because I spent $52,000 on steel-reinforced concrete just to watch her comfortable, fraudulent life crumble into dust. And I'll tell you right now, leaning back in my chair with the setting sun warming my face, listening to nothing but the sound of my cattle and the wind in the cottonwoods, it was worth every single penny. My name is Jake McCoy, and my family has owned the Broken Spur Ranch since my great-granddaddy put a down payment on it in 1940, with money he'd saved up from breaking horses for the Army. It ain't the biggest spread in the county, not by a long shot, but our 50 acres are ours. They're soaked in the sweat and blood of 3 generations of McCoys. Every fence post, every gate, every rut in the dirt carries a story. We run a small but respected herd of Black Angus cattle, specializing in prize bulls. The genetics in a single one of those animals can be worth more than a new truck, and I treat them with the respect that kind of value demands. My life had a rhythm to it, dictated by the sun and the seasons, not by a clock on the wall. It was a good life, a quiet life. Then came Sterling Meadows. On the parcel of land bordering my eastern fence line, a developer bought up 100 acres of what used to be Old Man Hemlock's hayfield. Soon, the sounds of tractors and birdsong were replaced by the whine of saws and the beep, beep, beep of heavy machinery in reverse. They scraped the earth bare, laid down pristine asphalt roads that coiled like black snakes, and started putting up these oversized beige houses that all looked like they were designed by someone who'd only ever seen a farmhouse in a magazine. They were packed in tight, with lawns the size of postage stamps. My wife, Sarah, a school teacher with more patience in her little finger than I have in my whole body, just shook her head. "Well," she'd said, sipping her coffee on our porch, "there goes the neighborhood." I just grunted. Live and let live, I figured. As long as they stayed on their side of the fence, it was no business of mine. The problem was, they didn't stay on their side of the fence. Specifically, she didn't. Her name was Karen Bradshaw. She was the president of the New Homeowners Association and, as I'd later learn, the real estate agent selling all the properties. The first time I saw her, she was parked in her gleaming white BMW X5, right at the mouth of my private gravel drive. This drive wasn't some shortcut. It was the access road that ran a half-mile along my property line from the old county road back to my hay barns and my northern pasture. It was, and had been for over 80 years, part of the Broken Spur Ranch. The deed and the county survey maps made that clearer than a blue sky in August. She rolled down her window as I rumbled up in my old Ford F-250, the bed full of feed bags. A cloud of dust from my tires settled on the pristine white paint of her German chariot. She wrinkled her nose. "Excuse me," she said, her voice dripping with that fake, syrupy sweetness that sets a countryman's teeth on edge. "I was just admiring this quaint little lane. Is this a public road?" I tipped my hat, keeping it polite. It was the first time, after all. "No, ma'am. This is my private drive. Belongs to the ranch." She gave a little tinkling laugh, like I'd told a charming but foolish joke. "Oh, really? Well, the developer assured us there was a lovely country path for residents to use. For jogging and, scenic drives." She gestured vaguely with a manicured hand. "Community access is so important for property values." I leaned my arm on the door of my truck. "Ma'am, with all due respect, the developer was mistaken. This road is on my land. The property line is that fence, right there." I pointed to the weathered barbed wire fence that my granddaddy had strung up himself. "The only folks who use this road are me, my family, and the occasional vet or feed delivery truck." Her smile tightened. The syrupy sweetness started to curdle. "Well, we'll have to see about that. An easement must be in place. It's standard for these kinds of developments." She said easement like it was some magic word that could bend reality to her will. She put her car in gear, not waiting for a reply, and sped off, kicking up a rooster tail of gravel that peppered the side of my truck. I watched her go, a bad feeling settling in my gut like a cold stone. This wasn't going to be a live and let live situation after all. A few days later, the trespassing started for real. I'd see her white BMW zipping down the drive, using it as a shortcut to the main highway instead of taking the winding asphalt roads of her own subdivision. I figured I'd make it official. I went to the hardware store and bought a brand new sign, a big metal one. Private property, no trespassing. I bolted it to a sturdy post right at the entrance to the drive. It was impossible to miss. The next morning, the sign was gone, not taken down. It looked like someone had backed into the post and snapped it off at the base. And there were fresh tire tracks, thinner than my truck's, leading from the drive right up to the broken post. I didn't need a detective. I just dragged the post out of the ditch, dug a new hole, and set it back in place with a bag of quick-setting concrete. The real trouble began when she started bringing her customers. I was out checking the fence line when I saw her BMW crawling down my road, moving slow. Beside her in the passenger seat was a hopeful-looking couple, the kind of folks who look like they get their clothes from a catalog. Karen was pointing and gesturing, a big fake smile plastered on her face. I could practically hear her from 100 yards away. "And this charming country lane is part of the Sterling Meadows community amenities," she was probably saying. "Perfect for evening strolls and connecting with nature." I strode over to the fence. I waited until she was right alongside me. I didn't shout. I just stood there, my arms crossed, until she was forced to stop or run me over. She rolled down the window, the smile gone, replaced by a flash of annoyance. "Can I help you?" she snapped, as if I were the one out of place. "Ma'am, I believe we had this conversation," I said, my voice low and even. "This is private property. You're trespassing. And you're bringing guests." The husband in the passenger seat looked confused, glancing from me to Karen. "Is there a problem, honey?" the wife asked. Karen shot them a reassuring smile before turning back to me, her eyes like chips of ice. "This is just a misunderstanding," she said through gritted teeth, loud enough for them to hear. Then she lowered her voice to a venomous whisper. "You are interfering with a client tour. This path is a community easement, and if you continue to be obstructive, you will be hearing from my lawyer. We are trying to build a premier community here, and your hostile, backwards attitude is not conducive to neighborhood synergy." Neighborhood synergy. I almost laughed. "There is no easement," I said, my own voice getting harder. "This is my land. The next time I find you on it, I'm calling the sheriff." She scoffed, a nasty, ugly sound. "Go ahead, call him. See who he believes. The president of the Sterling Meadows HOA or some dirt-kicking redneck." She gunned the engine and sped away, leaving the couple looking rattled and me tasting dust and fury. I stood there for a long time, watching the dust settle, and I knew this was just the beginning. The politeness was over. The breaking point, the moment that turned this from a nuisance into a war, came a week later. It was a hot, still afternoon. I was moving a small herd of my best Angus heifers, about a dozen of them, from the lower pasture to the paddock near the barn. These weren't just any cattle. These were my future. 3 of them were pregnant with calves from my prize bull, Old Ironsides, genetics I'd spent a decade cultivating. Their calves were already sold, contracts signed, for a pretty penny. You don't rush pregnant heifers. You move them slow. You talk to them. You keep them calm. We were halfway across the gravel drive, a slow-moving river of black hide and gentle patience, when I heard it. The high-pitched whine of an engine moving way too fast. It was her. The white BMW came flying around the bend, probably doing 50 on a road that was unsafe at 20. She saw the cows, and instead of slowing down, she laid on the horn. A long, blaring, angry shriek that shattered the afternoon quiet. Cattle are prey animals. A sudden, loud noise like that sends one message to their ancient brains: danger. The herd exploded. It was pure chaos. They scattered in every direction, eyes wide with terror. One of them, a beautiful 2-year-old heifer named June, heavily pregnant, slammed sideways into the barbed wire fence. She went down, tangled and screaming, a sound of pure animal pain that rips a rancher's heart out. I saw red. I didn't even think. I sprinted towards the downed heifer, waving my arms and screaming at Karen. "Stop! What in God's name are you doing?" She slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt just feet from another terrified cow. She rolled down her window, her face contorted with rage, not concern. "Move your filthy cows, you disgusting redneck trash!" she screamed, her voice cracking. "I have a closing in 20 minutes. This is a road." I ignored her. My only concern was June. I got to the fence and saw it was bad. The barbed wire had sliced into her leg, and she was struggling, making it worse. Her breathing was ragged, panicked. She was going into shock, and I could see the telltale signs of premature labor starting. This was a disaster. A potential 5-figure disaster, not to mention the life of an animal I had raised from a calf. I turned back to Karen, my hands shaking with a rage so pure and cold it felt like ice in my veins. I walked slowly to her car door. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. I leaned down, and I spoke in a voice I barely recognized as my own. "You listen to me," I said, my voice quiet and dead. "Get off my property. This is the last time you will ever set foot on this land. If I see you, your car, or any of your people on this side of that fence again, you will regret it for the rest of your life. There will be no more warnings, no more conversations, no more." For the first time, she looked scared. The entitled fury in her eyes was replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. She saw something in my face that her lawyers and her HOA bylaws couldn't protect her from. She didn't say a word. She just stared. Then slowly, she put the car in reverse and backed away, her eyes never leaving mine. I didn't watch her go. I turned back to my injured heifer, my mind already turning, the gears of retribution beginning to grind. The war had begun. My wife Sarah met me at the barn. She'd heard the commotion and the awful sound of the heifer. She took one look at my face, pale and grim under a layer of dust and sweat, and knew. She put a hand on my arm. "How is she?" "The vet's on his way," I said, my voice tight. "She's in a bad way, Sarah. The calf, I don't know." I ran a hand over my face, the anger simmering just below the surface. She did this, that woman. She did this for no reason other than she was in a hurry. Sarah's gentle face hardened. She was a teacher, used to dealing with unruly kids and their entitled parents. She recognized the species. "What are you going to do, Jake?" "I'm going to end it," I said. "For good." The first step was simple. The next morning, I drove into town and went to the farm supply co-op. I didn't buy another polite little lock. I bought a 10-foot length of hardened grade 80 transport chain, the kind they use to tie down bulldozers on flatbed trucks. I bought a padlock that looked like it belonged on a bank vault, a solid block of steel with a shrouded shackle. I wrapped that chain around my gatepost and the heavy steel gate itself, cinching it so tight you couldn't have slipped a piece of paper through it. I snapped the lock shut. It was ugly, industrial, and utterly unapologetic. It wasn't a suggestion anymore. It was a statement. I also bought a trail camera, a good one, with night vision and a high-resolution sensor. I mounted it high on a nearby oak tree, hidden in the leaves, with a perfect view of the gate. I wanted to know exactly who I was dealing with, and I wanted proof. I didn't have to wait long. The very next day, I checked the SD card. There she was, clear as day in the morning light. The white BMW pulled up. Karen Bradshaw got out, dressed in yoga pants and a designer top, looking thoroughly annoyed. She yanked on the chain, her face turning red with exertion. When it didn't budge, she went to the back of her SUV and pulled out a brand new pair of bolt cutters, the kind with the long, red handles for extra leverage. The video showed her struggling for a good 5 minutes, her whole body straining, until finally, with a snap, the hardened steel link of my expensive chain gave way. She tossed the cut chain into the ditch, threw the bolt cutters in her car, and drove through, a triumphant sneer on her face. I saved the video file, labeling it trespass_and_destruction_01. I went back to town, bought another length of chain, another $50 padlock, and did it all again. This time, I also hammered a new, bigger sign into the ground next to the gate. It read, "Private property. Violators will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. This means you, Karen." That, it turned out, was a mistake. It felt good to write, but it was poking the bear. The next day, the chain was cut again. The trail cam video was priceless. This time, she was furious, her face a mask of purple rage. She didn't just cut the chain. She took a moment to kick the sign, leaving a scuff mark from her expensive running shoe. Taped to the gatepost was a sheet of crisp, white paper, protected in a plastic sleeve. It was a letter, typed in a fancy font. It was a cease and desist, written by her, not a lawyer, filled with corporate jargon and misspelled legal terms. It accused me of defamation of character for using her name, unlawful impedance of a prescriptive easement, and creating a public nuisance. It ended with the threat of imminent and severe legal action if the illegal obstruction was not removed. I laughed. I actually laughed out loud standing there in the dust. Prescriptive easement? In Texas, that's damn near impossible to claim, especially on actively managed agricultural land. It requires years of open, notorious, and hostile use without the landowner's permission. She'd been here less than 6 months. I folded the letter, put it in my pocket, and saved the new video file. Trespass_and_destruction_02. Then the official harassment began. The first shot was a call from the county. A polite but firm woman from the health department informed me that a complaint had been filed against my ranch. The complaint alleged improper and unsanitary storage of animal waste and potential contamination of groundwater due to livestock runoff. I knew my operation was clean. We followed every regulation and then some. My manure was composted in a contained, concrete-lined facility, miles from any well. The inspector, a weary-looking man named Bill, who'd probably seen it all, came out the next day. I walked him through everything. I showed him my composting setup, my water diversion ditches, my well water test results that I performed twice a year. He nodded, took a few notes, and kicked at the dirt. "Mr. McCoy," he said, finally, "your operation is one of the cleanest I've seen in this county. I don't know who filed this complaint, but it's completely baseless. I'm filing it as unfounded." He paused, looking over toward the beige monstrosities of Sterling Meadows. "Between you and me, the complaint came from the new HOA over there. The lady on the phone was aggressive. Used the words imminent public health crisis." I just nodded. "I'm not surprised, Bill. Thank you for your time." He tipped his hat and left. I added the inspector's visit and his comments to a growing file I was keeping in my office. A week later, the second, more serious shot came. This one was from the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. 2 agents in a government sedan pulled up my main drive. They were professional, all business. The complaint this time was even more fantastical. Unauthorized discharge of industrial and biological contaminants into a protected tributary of Willow Creek. My land bordered a small seasonal creek, and I was meticulous about protecting it. This inspection was no friendly walk-around. It took hours. They took water samples, soil samples. They looked at my fuel storage tanks, my equipment maintenance logs. I answered every question calmly and truthfully, providing them with years of documentation. They were thorough, I'll give them that. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the lead agent closed his notebook. "Mr. McCoy, everything appears to be in order. In fact, your containment and water management systems exceed current standards. We'll get the lab results back in a few weeks, but I don't anticipate any issues. We have a legal obligation to follow up on every complaint, but this one seems speculative." "Speculative is one word for it," I said. "Harassment is another." He gave me a look that said he agreed, but couldn't say so officially. "Have a good day, sir." The stress was getting to me. The vet bills for June the heifer were piling up. She'd lost the calf, and it was touch and go whether she'd survive at all. Every time the phone rang, I tensed up, wondering what new circle of bureaucratic hell she was trying to drag me into. Sarah saw the toll it was taking. She'd rub my shoulders at night while I was hunched over my desk, looking at maps and taking notes. "She's trying to wear you down," she said. "She thinks if she makes your life miserable enough, you'll just give her what she wants." "She doesn't know me very well then," I growled. The final offensive in her paper war came via a man in a cheap suit driving a beat-up sedan. He handed me an envelope. I was being sued. Not just me, but the Broken Spur Ranch, LLC. The plaintiffs were the Sterling Meadows Homeowners Association, Incorporated, and Karen Bradshaw. The lawsuit was for injunctive relief to remove an illegal barrier blocking a public access easement, and it sought monetary damages for the reduction in property values caused by my hostile and isolationist actions. This was it, the line she had crossed from which there was no retreat. She had made it a legal battle. Fine. I would bury her in the law. I didn't call one of the slick lawyers from the city. I called Old Man Hemmings, a country lawyer who had handled my father's will. His office was dusty, smelled of old books and pipe tobacco, and his mind was still as sharp as a brand-new pocket knife. I laid everything out on his desk, the videos, the notes from the inspectors, the threatening letter, and now the lawsuit. He read through the suit, his bushy white eyebrows furrowing. "Prescriptive easement, huh?" he grunted, leaning back in his creaky chair. "Ambitious and stupid. Jake, let's go down to the county clerk's office. Let's pull the original survey." We spent the better part of a day at the county courthouse. It was a place of hushed whispers and the rustle of old paper. The clerk, a woman who had known my family for decades, helped us pull the old plat maps. We unrolled a survey from 1947, a beautiful, hand-drawn document on linen paper. There it was, clear as can be, the parcel of my ranch, with the road drawn firmly inside my property lines. We cross-referenced it with the deed, then the deed for the land that was now Sterling Meadows. There was no mention of an easement, no right-of-way, nothing. We checked every transfer, every sale, every subdivision of that land for the last 80 years. The road was mine, period. Legally, her lawsuit was a work of fiction. "She's got nothing, Jake," Hemming said, rolling the old map up. "This is a nuisance suit, designed to bleed you dry with legal fees until you give up." "I'm not giving up," I said. "And I'm not just going to defend, I'm going to attack. There's something else going on here. She's too desperate." The key that unlocked the whole thing came from the most unlikely of sources, Eddie the mailman. Eddie had been delivering mail in this part of the county for 30 years. He was a gossip, but a reliable one. He drove his little mail truck down my main drive one afternoon and stopped where I was fixing a fence. He handed me my mail and leaned out the window, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Heard you're having it out with Queen Karen over at the palace," he said, jerking a thumb toward Sterling Meadows. "You could say that," I replied, hammering a staple into a post. "Figured," he said. "The amount of legal-looking mail she's been getting? Letters from banks, credit card companies, all with those red past due stamps on them. She's in deep, Jake. Word is, her divorce from that oil guy in Houston took her to the cleaners. She's leveraged up to her eyeballs on this development. She needs to sell these houses, and she needs to sell them now." He paused, looking around as if someone might be listening. "And here's the kicker. I delivered a stack of marketing brochures for her last week. Big, glossy things. I might have, had a look at one that fell out of the box." He winked. "She's promising them all exclusive, deeded access to the historic Riverside Trail." I stopped hammering. "The what?" "The Riverside Trail," Eddie repeated. "That's what she's calling your dirt road. It's in the contracts, Jake. I heard one of the new homeowners talking about it. It's listed as a formal amenity, like the swimming pool. Says so right in their sales agreement." That was it. The tumblers of the lock clicked into place in my mind. It all made sense now. The desperation, the baseless lawsuit, the harassment. She wasn't just trespassing for convenience. She was committing fraud on a massive scale. She was selling something she didn't own, and her entire financial future was tied to her ability to deliver on that lie. If she couldn't give her buyers access to my road, their contracts could be voided. She'd face a flood of lawsuits that would drown her. I finally had her. I knew her fatal flaw. Her next move was predictable for someone so cornered. She went to the media. The local news channel ran a segment on the evening news. It was a masterpiece of manipulation. It opened with a shot of my heavy, chained gate looking menacing. Then it cut to Karen, her face a mask of practiced concern, a slight tremor in her voice. "We came here to build a community," she said, dabbing at a dry eye. "We just want to be good neighbors. But this hostile rancher," the camera zoomed in on her pained expression, "he's holding us hostage. He's blocked what has always been a community path, even cutting off potential access for emergency vehicles. We're all worried for our safety." They showed a map, a grossly inaccurate one she must have provided, that showed my road as the only direct route to the highway. It was a lie. Her own subdivision had 2 perfectly good paved exits. But the damage was done. My phone started ringing. People I'd known for years, asking me why I was being so unreasonable. Sarah came home from school, her face tight with anger. The other teachers, the parents, they'd all seen it. They were looking at her differently. The narrative was set. I was the bad guy, the crazy, angry redneck hoarding his land. That night, Sarah and I sat on the porch swing. The comfortable silence we usually shared, now filled with a heavy tension. The news segment had shaken me more than I wanted to admit. "You're planning something, aren't you?" she said softly, looking at my hands, which were clenched into fists on my knees. Something more than just fighting her in court. I took a deep breath, the smell of dust and hay filling my lungs. I laid it all out for her. The fraud, Eddie's information, the voidable contracts, the house of cards that Karen Bradshaw had built. And then I told her my plan, the final, nuclear option. "I'm going to spend the bull fund," I said. "All of it. I'm going to build a wall." She was silent for a long moment. $52,000. It was our nest egg, the result of years of hard work and careful breeding. It was for our retirement, for emergencies. To spend it all on this, it was a monumental risk. I watched her face in the twilight, expecting her to tell me I was crazy. But then she looked over at the pasture, where June was slowly, painfully recovering. She looked at the ugly, chained gate. She looked at me. And a slow, determined smile spread across her face. Good, she said, her voice firm. Do it. Build your wall, Jake. It was in that moment, with the full backing of my wife and the knowledge of my enemy's weakness, that I truly felt the tide turn. Karen Bradshaw thought she was fighting a war of attrition, a paper war she could win by bleeding me dry. She had no idea I was about to change the battlefield entirely. I wasn't just going to build a fence, I was going to build a fortress, a monument to her greed and my resolve. And you know, it's a funny thing. When you finally stop reacting to someone else's crazy and start executing your own cold, calculated plan, a sense of peace settles over you. That's how I felt. If you've ever been pushed to the brink by someone who thinks rules and decency don't apply to them, you know the feeling. It's the moment you decide you're done playing their game. If you appreciate a good story about drawing a line, a big, concrete one, then do me a favor and hit that like button. Subscribe for more tales from the ranch, because this is far from the only crazy story I've got. The first call I made the next morning wasn't to my lawyer. It was to a man named Big Mike. Big Mike ran a construction company that specialized in agricultural and industrial projects. His motto, printed on the side of his dusty Ford F350 dually, was, "If you want it to last forever, call us." He was a mountain of a man with a grip like a vice and a perpetual wad of tobacco tucked in his cheek. More importantly, he had a deep-seated philosophical hatred for HOAs and entitled city folk who moved to the country and immediately tried to change it. I met him at the gate. I showed him the cut chains, told him the whole story, from the honking at my heifers to the fraudulent lawsuit. He listened, nodding slowly, his expression growing darker with every detail. When I was done, he spat a stream of brown tobacco juice into the dust. "So let me get this straight," he rumbled, his voice like gravel pouring into a barrel. "This BMW Barbie is selling your road as a walking trail, suing you for blocking it, and calling the EPA on you when you tell her to get lost." "That's the short version," I said. "And you want to stop her," he said. It wasn't a question. "I want to build a wall," I clarified. "A real one, something a BMW can't drive through, something her bolt cutters can't touch, something that makes it clear, permanently, where my land begins and her fantasy ends." A slow grin spread across Big Mike's face. It was a scary sight. "Son," he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder that nearly drove me into the ground, "you've come to the right place. I've been waiting for a job like this my whole life." We spent the next hour walking the property line, half a mile of fence. We weren't just planning a wall. We were planning a military-grade installation. "We'll go 12 feet high," Mike declared. "Anything less is just an invitation for teenagers to try and climb it. We'll dig a 4-foot footer, continuous pour, and lace it with number 5 rebar. The panels themselves will be 10-inch thick, steel-reinforced concrete. Even a tank ain't getting through this." "What about the permits?" I asked. "Won't the county have a fit?" "Nah," he waved a dismissive hand. "That's the beauty of it. We're not filing for a residential fence. Those have height limits and setback rules. We're filing for an agricultural security barrier. It's a different classification. You've got documented proof of trespassing, property destruction, and livestock endangerment. We'll state the purpose is to protect your valuable livestock, which is true, from outside threats and potential biocontamination from unauthorized persons. It's perfectly legal, untouchable. The HOA can squawk all they want. They have no jurisdiction." The cost was, as I expected, breathtaking. He scribbled some numbers on a notepad. The concrete, the rebar, the labor, the equipment rental. The final figure came to $52,480. "Paid in cash or certified check," he said. "I don't do payment plans on revenge projects." I didn't even flinch. "I'll have a check for you tomorrow," I said. It was the Bull Fund. The money I'd set aside from selling the genetics of Old Ironsides and his predecessors. It felt fitting. The money earned from my prize animals would be used to build a fortress to protect them. The final piece of the puzzle was timing. This couldn't just be about building a wall. It had to be a spectacle. It had to detonate in the middle of her life with maximum impact. That's where Eddie the mailman came in again. I caught him a few days later and asked him to keep an ear out for any big events happening at Sterling Meadows. He called me 2 nights later. "Bingo," he said, his voice giddy with the thrill of espionage. "She's planning a huge grand opening gala for Saturday 2 weeks from now. She's got the mayor coming, catering from that fancy place in the city, live music, and she's invited the Channel 8 news crew back for a community success story piece. It's her big push to get the last dozen houses sold. She's been handing out flyers that say, "Come see the lifestyle Sterling Meadows has to offer, including our beautiful Riverside Trail." That was it. The date was set. I called Big Mike. "We start Monday," I said, "and we have to be finished by Friday." "It'll be tight," he said, "but for this, my boys will work through the night if they have to." The Monday of the gala week, the invasion began. At 5 a.m., while the sky was still a dark, bruised purple, the ground began to shake. A convoy of heavy equipment rumbled down the county road and onto my property. A massive excavator, a bulldozer, 2 skid steers, and Big Mike's F350, all with their lights blazing. His crew, a team of 6 grim-faced, muscular men who looked like they wrestled bears for fun, piled out and immediately got to work. The first step was the most gloriously destructive. The excavator, with a massive bucket, moved to the entrance of my gravel drive, her Riverside Trail, and plunged its teeth into the earth. With a groan of protesting dirt and rock, it dug a trench 10 feet wide and 4 feet deep, completely severing the road. There was no going around it. It was a moat. Karen's reaction was, shall we say, prompt. Around 7:30 a.m., just as the sun was clearing the trees, her white BMW came tearing down the road in Sterling Meadows. She screeched to a halt, her jaw dropping as she stared at the scene of industrial chaos on my property. My road was gone, replaced by a massive ditch and a flurry of activity. She jumped out of her car and stormed over to the property line, her face a thundercloud. "What is the meaning of this?" she shrieked at Big Mike, who was calmly directing the excavator operator. Big Mike turned slowly, took a long, deliberate spit of tobacco, and pointed a thick finger at a wooden stake he had hammered into the ground. Tacked to it, inside a plastic sleeve, was a bright orange building permit from the county. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble, "we're building an agricultural security barrier. Got the permit right there. Now if you'll excuse us, we're on a schedule." "You can't do this. I'll sue you. I'll sue all of you," she screamed, her voice hoarse. "Get in line," Big Mike grunted and turned his back on her. She did what I knew she would do. She called the sheriff. A deputy I knew, a young guy named Miller, rolled up about 20 minutes later. He got out of his car, looking tired. Karen ran up to him, gesturing wildly, a torrent of accusations pouring out of her. Miller listened patiently, then walked over to the stake, read the permit, and walked over to me where I was watching from my truck. "Jake," he said with a sigh, "she's saying you're destroying a public road." I handed him a folder. Inside was a copy of my deed, a copy of the 1947 survey map, and a letter from my lawyer, Mr. Hemmings, explaining the complete lack of any easement. Miller read through it, nodding. He handed it back. "Looks in order to me," he said. He walked back over to Karen. "Ma'am, this is private property. They have a valid permit. There's nothing I can do. You need to stay off their land while they're working." Her shriek of frustration could have curdled milk. She spent the rest of the day pacing along her side of the property line, screaming into her phone at her lawyer, the county planning office, anyone who would listen. It was music to my ears. For the next 3 days, Big Mike's crew worked with brutal efficiency. They laid down the rebar cages, a complex web of steel that would give the wall its spine. They built the wooden forms. Karen, becoming more unhinged by the day, tried to sabotage the work. My trail cams, which I had repositioned, caught her sneaking out late one night, trying to pull the rebar ties apart with her bare hands. The next night, Big Mike posted one of his guys, a terrifyingly large man named Tiny, to sit in a chair with a thermos of coffee and just watch. The sabotage stopped. Thursday was concrete day. At dawn, a parade of concrete trucks began. One after another, they backed up to the forms and began to pour. It was a massive, continuous operation that lasted all day. The gray slurry filled the forms, entombing the steel rebar. The wall began to rise from the earth, a solid, implacable fact. By sunset, half a mile of 12-foot-high, 10-inch-thick concrete stood gleaming in the fading light. It was brutalist, it was imposing, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. Friday was for finishing touches. The crew stripped the forms, revealing the smooth, hard face of the concrete. At the main entrance to my ranch, where the old steel gate had been, they installed the new one. It wasn't a gate, it was a door. A solid sheet of half-inch plate steel, painted black, set on massive hinges and controlled by a heavy-duty hydraulic opener. Big Mike called it the Dragon's Tooth. As they were putting the final bolts on the new gate late Friday afternoon, Karen snapped. She had been watching all day, her car parked at the edge of her development, a coiled spring of impotent rage. Maybe it was the finality of it all. Maybe she had just gotten off the phone with her lawyer, who had finally told her she had no case. Whatever it was, something in her broke. She got into her BMW. She revved the engine, once, twice. Then she floored it. She wasn't aiming for the wall. Even she wasn't that stupid. She was aiming for the gap where my old gravel drive used to be, where Big Mike had parked a skid steer and a stack of leftover steel I-beams. She must have had some fantasy that she could plow through it all and reclaim her road. The sound was sickening. A metallic shriek of tearing metal, a percussive crunch, and the tinkle of shattering glass. The pristine white BMW, her symbol of status and superiority, slammed into the immovable mass of the skid steer. The front end of the car folded like an accordion. The hood buckled upwards. Steam and smoke billowed from the crushed engine. The airbags deployed with a violent poof. For a second, there was dead silence. Then, the car door was shoved open and Karen stumbled out, a cut on her forehead, dazed and sobbing. She wasn't screaming about lawyers or easements anymore. She was just crying, a raw, animal sound of utter defeat, staring at the wreckage of her car and the monolithic wall that now dominated her view. Big Mike was already on the phone to the sheriff. "Yeah, it's Mike, down at the McCoy Ranch," he said calmly. "You'd better send a deputy, and a wrecker. The lady next door just tried to ram my equipment with her car." He paused. "Yeah, she's not going anywhere." He hung up and looked at me, a slow grin spreading across his face. He spat. "Phase 1 complete," he said. The sheriff came, and this time it was serious. Reckless endangerment, destruction of property. They put her in handcuffs, right there in front of the wall. She was a mess, crying, babbling incoherently. But I knew her. I knew she'd post bail. The real show, the grand finale, was still to come. It was scheduled for the next day, at her grand opening gala. Saturday morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect Texas day. Over in Sterling Meadows, you could feel the buzz of activity. White tents were set up on the manicured community lawn. You could hear the faint sound of a string quartet tuning up. A big banner, flapping gently in the breeze, read, "Sterling Meadows Grand Opening Gala. Find your dream home today." Karen, true to form, was there. She'd made bail. She was driving a sad-looking rental sedan. I could see her from my property, flitting about in a new, expensive-looking dress, her face caked with makeup that couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes or the small bandage on her forehead. She was playing the role of the gracious, successful host, but she looked like a ghost at a feast. I wasn't at the gala. I had my own party to attend. I set up 2 folding lawn chairs and a cooler full of iced tea on my side of the property line, right in the shadow of my new, magnificent wall. Sarah sat with me, holding a book but not reading it. We were just waiting. Around noon, the guests started to arrive at her event. Well-dressed couples, young families, all with that hopeful, aspirational look of potential homebuyers. They mingled, they drank champagne from plastic flutes, they listened to the music. And then, inevitably, they began to wander. Lured by the promises in the brochures, they went looking for the beautiful, historic Riverside Trail. What they found instead was a 12-foot-high, half-mile-long wall of uncompromising concrete. Their path was blocked. They'd wander up to it, a confused look on their faces, touching the hard, cool surface as if they couldn't believe it was real. And there I'd be, sitting in my lawn chair with a friendly smile. "Howdy, folks," I'd say, tipping my hat. "Welcome to the neighborhood." A man in a pastel polo shirt and khaki shorts looked utterly bewildered. "Excuse me," he said, pointing at the wall. "We were told there was a nature trail here. The sales agent, Ms. Bradshaw, made a big deal about it." This was the moment. The trap was sprung. I reached into a folder I had sitting on the cooler. I'd spent half the night at the copy shop. I had packets, dozens of them. "Well, sir, I'm afraid you've been misinformed," I said, my voice calm and neighborly. "What you're looking at is the boundary of my private ranch. This has never been a community trail or an easement of any kind. Here, maybe this will help clear things up." I handed him, and the growing crowd of confused buyers gathering around him, one of my packets. Inside, I had arranged everything with perfect clarity. On top was a clean copy of my land deed, with the property lines highlighted in yellow. Behind that, the official 1947 county survey map, showing my road well within my property. Then, A copy of the court filing showing that the lawsuit Karen had filed against me had been summarily dismissed by a judge that very morning, thanks to an emergency filing by my lawyer. And for the grand finale, a printed statement from Mr. Hemmings, laying out in simple, devastating language that any mention of deeded access to this trail in a sales contract was fraudulent. I let them read. The quiet murmuring started almost immediately. I could see the dawning horror and anger on their faces as they looked from the documents in their hands to the impassive wall in front of them. Phones started coming out. They were looking at their own sales contracts, which they'd conveniently brought with them. I could hear them whispering the words deeded access and fraud. "She sold us a lie," one woman said, her voice shaking with rage. "This was a major selling point. We paid a premium for this lot because of the trail access." Just then, Karen must have noticed the crowd of her prize customers congregating at the edge of her development. She saw me, sitting there, handing out my packets of truth. Her composure, already fragile, shattered completely. She came marching across the lawn, her heels sinking into the grass, her face a mask of pure fury. "What is going on here?" she shrieked, her voice carrying across the entire party. The string quartet faltered and stopped playing. "Get away from my clients. You are on private property. You are harassing them." "Actually, ma'am," I said, not even getting up from my chair, "I'm on my property, and I'm just answering a few questions these nice folks had about the local geography." "He's a liar," she screamed at the crowd, her voice cracking. "He's a crazy, violent redneck who built this monstrosity out of spite. The trail is yours. I'll get it back. My lawyer is handling it." But her audience wasn't buying it. They were holding the proof of her lies in their hands. They were looking at her not as a gracious host, but as a con artist. And that's when the final act began. As if on cue, 2 county sheriff's cars came rolling slowly down the street in Sterling Meadows, their lights silently flashing. They weren't coming for me. They drove right past the party tent and parked behind Karen's rental car, blocking her in. And right behind them was the Channel 8 news van she herself had invited, the cameraman already hoisting his equipment onto his shoulder. A detective I didn't recognize, a man in a suit with tired, serious eyes, got out of the lead car. He walked past the stunned party guests, his eyes locked on Karen. He was holding a warrant. "Karen Bradshaw?" he asked, his voice calm and official, cutting through the tense silence. "Yes? What is this? I'm in the middle of an event," she snapped, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "Ma'am, you're under arrest." The color drained from her face. "What? For what? That fender bender yesterday? I posted bail." "No, ma'am," the detective said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. "You're under arrest on multiple counts of felony real estate fraud, uttering a forged instrument, and grand larceny by false pretenses." He gestured with his head towards the crowd of homeowners. "We've received numerous complaints. It seems you've been selling property amenities you don't actually own." The handcuffs clicked shut behind her back. The sound was crisp and final in the afternoon air. The news camera was rolling, capturing every second of it. Her face, a grotesque mixture of shock, disbelief, and terror. Her designer dress, the handcuffs, the concrete wall looming in the background like a tombstone. She started to babble, to scream. "No, this is a mistake. It's him. It's his fault," she shrieked, pointing a cuffed hand at me. "He did this. You can't do this to me. I have a lawyer." The deputies led her to the car, her protest dissolving into hysterical sobs. The buyers she had swindled were already lining up to give their statements to the other officers, my packets of evidence clutched in their hands. And me? I just sat there, in the shadow of my $52,000 wall. I picked up my glass of iced tea, took a long, slow sip, and gave the news camera a little nod. I didn't have to say a word. The wall said it all. Justice, like concrete, can be slow to set, but once it does, it's hard, and it's permanent. The aftermath was a quiet avalanche. Karen Bradshaw's empire, built on a foundation of lies and debt, collapsed overnight. The news story was the talk of the county, then the state. Rancher builds $50,000 spite wall to stop HOA fraudster, the headline screamed. They painted her as the villain she was, and me as some kind of folk hero, the quiet landowner who refused to be pushed around. The public loves a story like that. The lawsuits from the defrauded buyers hit her like a tidal wave. With her sales contracts voided and her assets frozen as part of the criminal investigation, she was wiped out. Bankruptcy was swift and total. The Sterling Meadows development went into receivership, a half-empty neighborhood of beige monuments to her greed. A bank eventually bought it for pennies on the dollar and, ironically, had to negotiate with me for a proper, legal utility easement, for which they paid a fair market price. Karen, facing a mountain of evidence, my videos, the testimony of her victims, her own fraudulent contracts, took a plea deal. She was sentenced to several years in state prison for felony fraud. The last I saw of her was a grainy photo in the local paper, a mugshot, stripped of her makeup, her designer clothes, and her arrogant smirk. She just looked tired and small. Life on the Broken Spur Ranch returned to what it had been. The rhythm came back. The only difference was the silence, the blessed, unbroken silence from the east, where the only sound now was the wind whispering over the top of my wall. June, my prized heifer, pulled through. She was barren after the trauma and the premature labor, but she was alive. I kept her as a pet, a living reminder of what had been at stake. She'd wander the pasture, fat and happy, a queen in her own right. Sometimes, in the evenings, Sarah and I will sit on the porch, watching the sun set behind the hills. The wall is just a dark line against the horizon, a permanent part of the landscape now. "It's quiet," she said one night, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Yep," I said, sipping my coffee. "Real quiet." She was silent for a moment. "Still think it was worth it? All that money?" I thought about the noise of Karen's BMW, the sound of her horn, the scream of my injured animal. I thought about the endless, harassing phone calls, the stress of the inspectors, the sneer on her face as she called me a redneck. Then I listened to the peaceful sound of my cattle lowing in the twilight, the chirp of the crickets, the rustle of the wind. "Sarah," I said, "it was a bargain. They say good fences make good neighbors. That might be true for reasonable people. But sometimes, when you're dealing with a neighbor from hell, a fence just isn't enough. Sometimes you need a 12-foot, steel-reinforced, $52,000 concrete wall to make a felon. And that is how a $52,000 wall saved my ranch and sent a fraudster to jail." If you love seeing entitled nightmares get a dose of concrete justice, smash that like button. Subscribe for more stories from the ranch. Have you ever had a neighbor from hell? Tell me in the comments.